Hi, this is my next video in my new chord symbol set of videos, and I'll pick up where I left off in the last video. I mentioned that the note represents one pitch and one pitch only. For example, here's a G4, and this note represents one pitch and one pitch only. And even if you had a G flat 4, it'd be the same thing. This note, this G flat 4 represents one pitch and one pitch only. Or if you had a G sharp 4, it'd be the same situation. And I mentioned in my last video that traditionally the sharp and flat symbols are referred to as accidentals. That's the traditional name, but I call them specifiers. Whether it be sharp, flat, double sharp, double flat, or natural, I call them specifiers. I'm just introducing a new term because in my systems that I present on YouTube, I have quite a few new terms, and you can use them or not use them. Now, the note, and I'm going to stop laboring on this issue, but the note, it is what it is. And, or it's what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG. The note just represents the tone. And the tone itself is once and done, as I mentioned. So you see the note or the tone technically cannot be raised or lowered. Now that sounds a little strange, but the note as written to represent that one pitch, that's it. It can't really be raised or lowered. When you introduce, let's say, the flat sign, you're not raising or lowering that G I just showed you. This is a totally different note representing a totally different tone. So I think that's clear, and I won't have to say it again. Now, the key, all right, we talked about the note, one pitch only, but one key on your piano or accordion keyboard can be used to play 2 or 3 different notes. Now let me show you an example here. Here's your C5 key. And that C5 key can be used to play the B sharp 4 note, the C5 note, or the D double flat 5 note. All right, it can be used to play 2 or 3 notes. All right, you can study that on your own, and you can see which keys can be used for which notes, and I'll let you research that on your own. Now we get to the interval. And the interval, unlike the note or the tone, can be raised or lowered. And I'll show you why. Because, well, here's an example interval. Here's what we call a fifth. I'm using my clefs, the ones I showed you before. This is the same as the G clef, the traditional G clef. This is called a fifth, an interval of a fifth. Here's your root, and here's your higher note, and this is called a general name. The fifth is the general name for that interval. The interval itself it's a relationship. It's a difference in pitch. Now, in this example, right, the root is F4, and the interval, all right, the general name is a fifth, but this top note may be referred to also as the fifth. It's the fifth in this interval. All right, the interval itself is called a fifth, but this note here can be called a fifth. You see? The interval itself, the difference in pitch, can be called a fifth, and the higher note in that interval, that relationship, may be referred to as a fifth. All right? I hope that's pretty clear. Now, in my previous videos, in one of them I talked about the general name of, that's pretty small, I apologize, but I couldn't make it any bigger. I showed how the general name is determined by how many total number of staff degrees are utilized in creating the interval. Now you see here's that's the same as the G clef, so don't panic. And here you have a staff degree down here. You have, this would be this line here, that'd be your first staff degree, your space, line, space, etc. And these lines and spaces correlate with these keys on your piano. Number 1, staff degree would be down here, 1, which would be like right level with this line. The note would go on that line. Number 2 would be that space. Number 3, see the line correlates with this key. We talked about that before, but I want to make this perfectly clear to show you how the staff degrees, it's either a space or a line, correlates with the white natural keys on the keyboard. And that's how you get your general name for an interval. Now, if you have a fifth, what do I do with that? Okay, here's your fifth. That's the general name. You see we have space, staff degree 1, line, space, line, space. Now, even if you change that, let's say you take out that top C5 and put in a C sharp 5, that's still, the general name is still a fifth. And even if you take that top note out and you put in a C flat 5, you still have a relationship, an interval called a fifth. All right? So you have a general name. We just showed you that. The fifth, that's determined by how many staff degrees are utilized in making that interval. And you also have a specific name. That fifth that I showed you, the specific name for this is called a perfect fifth. And I'll tell you why shortly. We don't need to rush into this. All right? And there's a whole bunch of different names for those specific interval names. You could have here minor second, major second, diminished third, augmented second, and so forth and so forth. You can print screen if you want to, or you can find this on the internet. You can find these names of intervals, and you can find how many half steps are in each interval. Now, let's get back to this very simple fifth so you don't get confused. We said we had a fifth here. We had a root, and we had the upper tone. The general name was a fifth. And I told you how we determined that. Well, let's look at it precisely. Based on staff degrees, all right, staff degrees that are utilized, actually used, we count F4 1, that's 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5. So you see you have 5 degrees utilized, being taken into consideration, and that's how you get the term fifth. That's how you get your fifth. 5 staff degrees are utilized. That's how you get your general name. Now, for the specific name, and I'll go into this in more detail later, the specific name is determined, all right, by the number of half steps between the tones. All right, the specific name. Now, let me just say this while we're at it. I say half steps. You'll hear people in other videos saying semitones, but that's a really crappy, misleading name. Don't use it. Semantically, it's just way off and it's crap. call them half steps. And then 2 half steps, naturally, make a whole step. Some people call them whole tones, referring to your keys on your keyboard. In other words, they call them semitones and whole tones, but those are really bad names. And you can study that on your own, and you'll discover that semitone and whole tone should be scrapped. It's a really inaccurate way to teach, especially teach little children. It's really so if you look at the specific name for our interval, all right, the 5th, you say, oh, I see what happened here. With F4, you start with your 0 count, right? You can start with 0 because we're talking about the distance between F4 and C5. So here's our starting point, which would be 0. So how many half steps? Well, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. These half steps, these keys I just showed you, are adjacent or contiguous. They're immediately adjacent, so that's how you determine. F4 from 0 up to C5 is 7 half steps, so we know that's a perfect 5th. Now, I have all this memorized because I've been playing with this for years, but if you're a beginner early on, you can always refer to your handy chart to let you know what the interval name is based on how many half steps are in that interval. All right? Now, I tried to say that as simply as possible because I'm showing how I started from nothing, from the staff, the simple staff, to get to a point where I could look at the chord differently and then eventually at some point explain it to somebody my new way, and hopefully that would be easier for the student to understand. We're going to find out in the next couple videos. You're going to say, oh, that's really great, I like it. Or you can say, oh, that's a bunch of crap, I ain't using that. So what I'm working on now is my, I'm up this far, System 2000 chord notation. That's what we're doing now. And the whole goal of any of my videos is to simplify and standardize, if that's even humanly possible in this modern world, this world of electronics and instant gratification. It's really hard to get people to think. So that's it for now, and I'll come back and go into more detail, and hopefully you won't get bored. So thank you for being patient, and good night.